Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. I am your host, Tim Keyes. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, where you can hear my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Wow, look at that. Tripping over my tongue already. At 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So there you go. Truth Be Told Radio Network, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. God Save the King. Please join me weekly. Now, if you happen to be just watching right now, you might be seeing me on a Facebook live stream Wednesday at 5 p.m. Now, I don't always do this, but I usually do this. So hopefully you're watching right now on Facebook. Live stream Wednesday, 5 p.m. But then the regular broadcast time on the Truth Be Told Radio Network is 10 p.m. on Fridays, 10 p.m. Eastern on Fridays. And then after the show is over on Friday, we always post the show to Rumble and Facebook. So if you miss the live broadcasts, you can always catch the archived broadcasts on Rumble and YouTube. So talking a little bit here about the Truth Be Told Radio Network, let me show you a couple things here. Let's take a look at the Truth Be Told Radio Network website. There you have it. Truth Be Told Radio Network, dive into the word. There's always a featured sermon. The Truth Be Told Radio Network, great Christian radio network, lots of great shows. Please check in frequently and enjoy a wide variety of shows on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And then likewise, like I mentioned already, if you've listened to my show, our preferred format, if you like a video format, if you prefer a video format, we like Rumble. If you like a podcast format, all you got to do is go to the Truth Be Told Radio Network website, click on the podcast button, and you'll see this page that will take you to the major podcast platforms where you can, click on the icon, go to that platform, subscribe, and you can get God Save the King and the Truth Be Told Radio Network delivered straight to whatever smart device you have as a podcast. And then, of course, last but not least, if you prefer just a standard audio format, like I mentioned a moment ago, you can simply go to the Truth Be Told Radio Network website, click on the Listen Live button, and use any of these formats to simply listen to the Truth Be Told Radio Network live on your smart device or however you want to do that. So we really appreciate you joining us as usual with all social media. If you will please hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons. And of course, that affects the algorithm, which, as you've heard many times, helps us help you. So if you enjoy content like this, please like, follow, and subscribe. And then that helps us continue to be on the air and to continue to bring you the content that you enjoy. So once again, my name is Tim Keyes. I am the host of God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. And what I try to do on my show here is I try to rescue truth from familiarity. That is a challenge that we have in the Christian world, is that oftentimes we are a little too familiar with a story, and therefore we don't always look at it, frankly, as critically as maybe we should. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. I got a great show for you today. I'm very excited about today's program. And if you have not listened to God Save the King before, let me take just 1 minute, and tell you what God Save the King is all about. Because what God Save the King all about, very simply, is retelling the nativity story the way it really would have happened. And what happened to me in my life is about 40 years ago, someone came to me and said, "Hey, did you know that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th? And thankfully, that didn't really rattle my cage. I mean, it rattled my cage in a good way. My response was, okay, show me. If you're going to tell me that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, show me the evidence. Show me what you got," right? So I didn't freak out. I didn't go, "Oh my God, this is horrible. Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. I went, "Okay, what do you got? Show me what you got," right? But what did happen, what was interesting, and I didn't realize this right away. It took me a minute before I realized this, was that although I readily accepted the notion that the date might change, initially I didn't really think it was going to change the story all that much. I thought the story was going to remain the same. And what I mean by that is that I was used to the traditional nativity story, as frankly, pretty much all of us are. See, and I didn't realize that changing the date was going to change the story. So when I initially started diving into it, once again, I kind of assumed that the story would remain the same. I changed the date that Jesus was born, realized that he was probably born in the fall and not born in the winter. But like I keep saying, I didn't think that was really going to change the rest of the story. But nonetheless, I continued to dig into the nativity story because if that fact was incorrect, maybe other facts might be incorrect. And lo and behold, that is what I discovered, is that by correcting one fact that was incorrect, it exposed another biblical or historical fact that proved to be incorrect, which exposed another, which exposed another, which exposed another. And the next thing you know, you got a domino effect going on. And what this led to was a continual and increasingly deeper realization that the modern traditional Christmas story is not biblically or historically accurate. It turns out that, frankly, it is a kind of Christian mythology. Okay, now there you go. I used a dangerous word. I used that very dangerous word, mythology, and I used it to describe the Christmas nativity story that is very beloved by a lot of people. And it is not my intention to offend you, but it is my intention to rescue truth from familiarity, because the modern, quote unquote, traditional Christmas story is not what the nativity looked like. It didn't look like that. This is an invention or a development. This is a story that is developed over hundreds of years into the story that we tell today, and how it really looked would have been quite different. Now, a couple of the broad strokes might remain the same. Yes, Joseph and Mary traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem and some things like that. Some of the broad strokes remain the same, but the details are quite different. Quite different. And that's part of what I want to address tonight, is this whole notion, frankly, of transposing or importing modern concepts backwards and then imposing them upon the ancient text. That is actually something that unfortunately we do all the time, but that we shouldn't do, frankly, ever, because the Bible is an ancient text. And if the Bible is an ancient text, then it needs to be understood. It needs to be read and interpreted and understood as an ancient text. That's how this works. So let's play a game. I want to play a game with you guys. I want to ask you a rhetorical question, and I want to see if you can answer this question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list a list of concepts and ideas and things, right? And I want to see if you can tell me what these ideas and things and concepts have in common, right? I'm going to make a list, and I want you to tell me, okay, what do these things have in common? And you can post it in the comment section if you want to do that, right? So what do these things have in common? And what else you can do is you can imagine that I'm an author and that I'm writing a biography, and I write a biography of a late 20th century person, and then these terms, these phrases come up in this biography of this late 20th century character. And here you go. So play along what do the following words, terms, phrases, ideas have in common? Here you go. Ready? Baby boomer, Cold War, Watergate, Wall Street, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, Grand Slam, Super Bowl, lightsaber, Big Mac, Xbox, and 9/11. Okay, now silence in radio is deadly, so I can't sit here and be silent. I can only sit here and kind of blabber for a second while you think that over. Think that over because it's not obvious, okay? I played this game with a friend, and he thought because the first 3 or 4 were, baby boomer, Cold War, Watergate, Wall Street, that it had something to do with, mid to late 20th century politics or economics or something like that. But then I throw him a curve and I said Hollywood, Silicon Valley, Grand Slam, Super Bowl, lightsaber, Big Mac, Xbox, 9/11. Okay, it's you got to think outside the box a little bit. What do all of these things have in common? And what they have in common is they are all what we call cultural allusions. Not illusion, allusion. So that's ALLUSION. These are all cultural allusions. And what a cultural allusion is, what an allusion is, let's start with an allusion. An allusion is an implied or indirect reference to a person, place, or thing. Okay. So, like, for example, if I say Watergate, that is an indirect reference to the entire Watergate incident back in the 1970s involving President Nixon, who then eventually resigned, and it was because of a break-in at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. So the word Watergate is a code word. It's an indirect or implied reference to that entire thing, right? So let me go through the list again, just really quickly. Baby boomer, Cold War. See, baby boomer, right? It's an allusion to a group of people born after World War II, between World War II and 1965. That's a baby boomer, right? Cold War, right? Cold War between the United States, Soviet Union, Watergate, Wall Street, Hollywood. See, Wall Street. See that? So that means the economics of the entire country, but focused on Wall Street in New York, what goes on Wall Street, Hollywood, okay, media, television, movies, entertainment, media, Silicon Valley, computers, technology, Grand Slam. Hey, man, he hit a grand slam. That's a baseball term, right? He won the Super Bowl. It's a football term. Hey, he's got a lightsaber. That's a Star Wars term. Everybody's heard of Star Wars, right? Okay. Big Mac, McDonald's, Xbox, video games, and 9/11, right? 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and other places around the United States that occurred on September 11th, 9/11. These are all cultural allusions. An allusion is an implied or indirect reference to a person, place, thing, or other idea. But the whole point here is that an allusion assumes that there is a shared body of knowledge between the person who uses the allusion and whoever it is they're either talking to, or in the case that I'm making here, who they are writing to, because our fictitious illustration here is that I've written a book, it's a biography, and that in this biography, there I go again, in this biography, writing about whoever it is I've chosen to write about in the late 20th century United States, I've used these terms to describe this person's life. But here's the point. The reader must have a shared point of reference, a shared frame of reference, or this isn't going to make sense. This won't make any sense. And it's a cultural allusion because almost all of this is based around the culture of the United States in the late 20th century. Baby boom, Cold War, Watergate, Wall Street, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, baseball, football, right? Grand Slam, Super Bowl, lightsaber, Big Mac, Xbox, 9/11, right? They are cultural allusions. So let's take the next step. Why am I doing this? Why did I spend this time on this illustration? Well, it's to illustrate a point, and it's to illustrate a point about the Bible, okay? Because when we read the Bible, the writers of the Bible are going to use cultural allusions. It's what we do. It's what we do as writers. Writers are always going to use cultural allusions. So the obvious question becomes, are you, as a reader of the Bible, sufficiently familiar with the cultural allusions to recognize them when you read them? See, because if you're from the United States in the last half of the 20th century or the early 21st century, right? And you were to read this biography, third time, read this biography that I'm talking about, this fictitious biography that I'm using as an illustration, and it uses this terminology, provided you've got any kind of decent frame of social and cultural reference for the past 50 to 70 years, then you're going to understand. You're going to get it. You're going to understand. But if you don't, see, and this is the point, if you're not familiar, if you don't have this common frame of reference and you read this book, you're not going to get it. If you don't know what a baby boomer is, if you don't know what the Cold War was, or what it means when I say Wall Street or Hollywood or Silicon Valley. See? So now take this illustration and apply it to the Bible, because the writers of the Bible are going to use cultural allusions. So the question becomes, are we, you and me, are we sufficiently familiar with the cultural allusions of the Bible that we can recognize them when we see them and understand what the writers are writing about? And the really obvious answer to that question is no, we're not. Okay, now we might think we are. Well, I've been reading the Bible, I've been studying the Bible all my life. Okay, great. That's good. That's good. That's better than not having studied the Bible all your life. Hopefully, you've learned a thing or two by now, but the initial answer always has to be, well, no, because I'm not from that day and time. So, no, I do not have a common frame of reference. And what that obviously means is I need to learn. I need to learn about that day and time so that I can understand the cultural allusions when I run into them. Because let's play the game, and I'm going to use another set of words, another set of cultural allusions. This one's going to be much shorter. I'm only going to list 5, but I want to see if you recognize these. Now, you probably do if you've read the Bible, but what I want you to do is I want you to ask yourself, do you have sufficient education? Do you have sufficient foundation in and frame of reference to that day and time to understand these things? So number 1, here we go. Number 1 is the word synagogue. All right, synagogue. What's a synagogue? Right? Okay, number 2, how about the word rabbi? What's the word rabbi? Okay. Here you go. How about the word Pharisee? Okay. Or the word demon or unclean spirit, right? Or how, ready for this? How about the word resurrection? resurrection, because believe it or not, these are cultural allusions of that day and time. So see, so the writers of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, James, etc., these are the writers of what we call the New Testament, and they would have used cultural allusions of the world they lived in. In other words, right? See, there it is. They would have been immersed in a certain culture, and therefore they would have used the terminology of that culture. And here you go. This is why this is so important. It is entirely reasonable to believe that the writers and readers of the New Testament had a common or shared point of view and base of knowledge. The author assumes the reader is going to understand his reference. There it is. The author assumes that the reader is going to understand the reference. So this is what I have been hammering on for weeks and weeks and weeks now, as I have been saying the first cardinal rule of biblical interpretation is context. Context, 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 context. And the fact that we do not, as a modern reader, we do not have the same frame of reference as the writers of the New Testament and the Old, okay, but the writers of the New Testament and the intended audience, because they did not know they were writing for an audience that was going to be reading this 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 years later. They were writing it to the audience that was right in front of them at the day and time, and that maybe it might last 10 or 20 or maybe even 50 years after they were alive, but they had no reason to understand that they were writing for generations and generations and generations to come. Okay. I mean, it's possible they had an inkling simply because they maybe had access to ancient writings themselves. So, if they had access to the writings of Moses, well, that goes back a bit. Or the Psalms of David. Yeah, that goes back a bit. That goes back, several hundred, if not 1,000 years or more, right? But same thing. Did Moses or David? No, that's not really a reasonable conclusion. It's a maybe, but it's not really a reasonable conclusion to believe that what you're writing is going to be read 500,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. There's no reason to assume that you're writing for the audience that is alive at that time, that has the shared experience, that has the shared frame of reference, and therefore understands your cultural allusions. Okay, now I've hammered that into the ground, so we have to reach a couple of conclusions about what we should and should not do with regard to these cultural allusions. Number one, if I'm reading the Bible, either the New Testament or the Old Testament, I do not understand. I don't have the same frame of reference. I don't get it. So therefore, what I've got to do, number one, is I've got to learn as much as I can and develop that frame of reference so that I can understand what I'm reading. There it is. I got to learn as much as I can about that day and time so that I understand what I'm reading. And then the other thing I have to do is actually what I have to, quote unquote, not do, which is do not, we need to avoid transposing or importing modern ideas backwards into the ancient text. Okay, we just cannot do that, because what we're doing is that is introducing ideas. If I'm trying to look backwards through a viewfinder of 2,000 years of Christian tradition, inevitably what I am going to do is I'm going to superimpose ideas that are foreign to the text onto the text. And that's what we need to avoid. And we seriously need to avoid that, because unfortunately, that is kind of how a lot of Christianity has read the Bible for a long time, is that they have been looking backwards through 2,000 years of Christian history and 2,000 years of Christian tradition, and are reading the Bible that way. Now, that doesn't mean that's automatically bad all the time, okay? But you can't transpose a modern idea back onto the text, right? It doesn't mean you can't look through that viewfinder and maybe ask an educated question that makes you think. Like, so I'm just going to pick a couple of random examples, right? I'm just totally picking random examples off the top of my head. First one is going to be the Protestant Reformation, right? If I try to look backwards through the viewfinder of the Protestant Reformation and impose that on the text, okay, that's no good. And that actually comes into play a little later in my talk today. I may bring that up, which is why maybe it's not entirely random. Maybe it's a subconscious thing on my part that I brought that up, right? But that is just one example. And I'm not saying the Protestant Reformation was a bad thing. I'm a Protestant. I think the Protestant Reformation overall was a good thing. But what I can't do is look backwards through the lens of Martin Luther or John Calvin or Zwingli or these other reformers and use that as my worldview to look backwards, right? Got to be very, very, very careful about that and not superimpose something on the text, right? So this is important, because what we need to realize, right, like I said a little while ago, is the Bible is an ancient text. It's an ancient text. The New Testament is 2,000 years old. The Old Testament is upwards to 3,000 years old. It is an ancient text. It needs to be understood as an ancient text, okay? I'm going to rephrase this ever so slightly. But there is an author whose name is John Walton, and John Walton has a quote that is very appropriate. Let me put it up right here so you can see it. Here we go. He wrote, "The Bible was not written to us, but it was written for us." The Bible was not written to us, but it was written for us. And I like to actually flip it. I know for me, this is a helpful statement when I actually flip the sentence and go, you know what? The Bible may have been written for us, but it was not written to us. It may have been written for us, but it was not written to us. See, we were not the primary audience. Okay? That's if the Bible writers had any clue whatsoever that someone was going to read this thing 2,000 years later, which I don't think you can reach that conclusion. So but the intended audience was clearly and obviously the people of that day and age that lived in and around where these men were writing. Okay. So here's a couple things we got to remember when we start practicing this, when we start not superimposing 2,000 years of Christian history back onto the text. Okay. Here's a couple things to remember. Jesus was not a Christian. He wasn't. He was not a Christian. He was a Jew. Still is a Jew, by the way. Okay. There is a Jewish man sitting on the right hand of God. Prove me wrong. There is a Jewish man sitting on the right hand of the throne of God. Okay. He's not a Christian. He's a Jew. Okay. Now, I realize that's a loaded statement and there's more to that, but Jesus was not a Christian. Joseph and Mary were not Christians. Okay. Because God Save the King is about the nativity. This is Jesus' parents. Jesus' parents, Joseph and Mary, were not Christians. Okay. The 12 were not Christians. They were Jews. Paul was not a Christian. Okay. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. You mean Paul's no longer from the tribe of Benjamin because he became a follower of Jesus Christ? Okay, now don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I know what the New Testament says. No longer Jew, no longer Greek, no longer male, no longer female. I know about our identity in Christ, and that is a different conversation for a different day. It's an important conversation for a different day. And I acknowledge our identity in Christ. But I think you see what I'm saying here when it comes to interpreting and understanding this 2,000-year-old book that we are reading, and that we do not have a shared frame of reference. We cannot import our ideas into the text. See, so this idea that, well, Jesus was a Christian, right? Or that the 12, they may have become Christians, like I said, another conversation for another day. But the world they lived in, they would have been immersed in the Jewish world of their day. They were not immersed in the Christian world of their day. They were immersed in the Jewish world of their day. Okay, Christianity was brand new. See, so you can't impose certain ideas. Once again, you can't transpose them backwards. Got to be very careful. Plus, they lived in a Jewish community, in a Jewish nation, but that was part of a larger Greco-Roman world. So that's part of the context as well. See, this is really, really important. Okay, so now moving on to kind of help understand this more. See, many Christians, me among them, did this for a long time. I assumed that, okay, well, the Old Testament, that's the Jewish part of the Bible, and the New Testament, well, that's the Christian part of the Bible, right? Okay. Therefore, when I would try to understand some of the Jewish things in the New Testament, then, well, how do I learn about them? Well, I just go to the Old Testament, right? Because the New Testament, that's the Christian part. The Old Testament, well, that's the Jewish part. And when I run into a reference to something Jewish in the New Testament, well, then in order to learn about it, I just go to the Old Testament, right? Right? Okay, now if you know how I work, okay. Wow, okay, I'm setting you up, right? So let's play another game, right? We played a game about cultural allusions where I asked you what these things have in common, right? Baby boomer, Cold War, Watergate, etc., right? Then we played another version of the same game, and I threw out synagogue, rabbi, Pharisee, right? Demon or unclean spirit, and resurrection. 5 very common ideas in the New Testament. You read those in the New Testament. Okay. Now let's play another game here. And this is all designed to stretch your thinking and to help us become more aware of the Jewish world of that time, and therefore interpret scripture properly, right? So here's a question for you, all right? What does a practicing Jew call the New Testament? What does a practicing Jew call the New Testament? Okay, now once again, silence in radio is death, so I can't not talk and just let the radio go silent, because you'll turn off, right? Okay, you'll change the channel on me. I got to keep talking. But think about that for a second. What does a practicing Jew call the New Testament? Okay, well, it's a rhetorical question. Most of them don't call it anything because the New Testament is irrelevant to a practicing Jew. Okay, so that's the answer to the question. What does a practicing Jew call the New Testament? Nothing. Okay. Now, they've got words for it in their language. Don't get me wrong. They're not, here you go. They are not entirely culturally illiterate. Okay. They know about what has happened in the history of the world for the past 2,000 years. They know what a Christian is. They know what the New Testament is, but the New Testament is not relevant to a practicing Jew. So they don't, a lot of them don't call it anything. Now, for what it's worth, in Hebrew, it's called Habrit HaKadashah. Habrit HaKadashah, which simply means the New Testament in Hebrew. So they've got words for it. They've got a name for it, but to a practicing Jew, it's irrelevant. So now, same idea. Let's ask a similar question. What does a practicing Jew call the Old Testament? Again, silence in radio is death. I can't keep silent. What does a practicing Jew call the Old Testament? Well, guess what? He doesn't call it the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is only relevant if you understand what the New Testament is and if the New Testament actually matters. So if the New Testament is irrelevant, then you wouldn't call it the Old Testament. You would just call it the Bible. Right? So to a practicing Jew, the Old Testament is just the Bible. Okay. Now they have their own name for it. It's based on an acronym. Okay. Which is based on what they believe are the three dominant parts of the Bible: the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. Now, my Hebrew is terrible. Don't imagine for 1 second that I know what's going on, with proper Hebrew pronunciation. Torah, Nevi'im, 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 and then Ketuvim, right? Torah means the instructions. Nevi'im means the prophets. Ketuvim means the writings, okay? So that is Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, right? TNK in English, and they make an acronym out of it, which is Tanakh, right? The Tanakh is the Old Testament. See, there I go, right? The Tanakh is the Hebrew Bible, okay? So once again, Jesus would have been deeply immersed in the Jewish world of his time, right? Most Christian readers of the New Testament do not understand that world. So why? Why do we not understand that world? Because we read the New Testament, okay, so we might get a modest understanding of that world from reading the New Testament, but maybe not. Because, like I said, we have a tendency to transpose ideas backwards. So what we've got to do is we've got to get away from this notion of transposing these ideas backwards and grasp onto what this world would have been like. Now, but I'm getting to an even bigger point here, and that we're going to go back to our game here, right? Okay. Synagogue, rabbi, Pharisee, demon, resurrection, right? So these are all common terms in the New Testament, right? The New Testament writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, James, etc., the New Testament writers would have used these as cultural allusions, assuming that their readers knew what they were, right? Okay. So if these are in the New Testament and I'm running into a Jewish cultural allusion that's in the New Testament, then I just go back to the Old Testament and find it, right? Right? Okay. So here you go. I want you to turn to the section of the Old Testament that talks about the synagogue. Or I want you to turn to the section of the Old Testament that talks about rabbis or Pharisees or demons or a personal resurrection, right? Now, a couple of these are there about this much, but overall, they're just simply not there. So these are Jewish ideas in the New Testament. I'm a Christian trying to understand the New Testament, here I am blathering on about how we've got to understand the cultural allusions. We've got to understand that day and time. So just go to the Old Testament, right? And then, but wait a second, synagogue, rabbi, Pharisee, demon, resurrection. They're pretty much not there. And what we've got to start to look at here is that this is a period of time called Second Temple Judaism. Second Temple Judaism. Now, what does that mean? Unpack this phrase, Second Temple Judaism. Well, number one, it's based around the Second Temple, right? Now, if you're reasonably familiar with the Bible, you should already know what the Second Temple is. But if you do not, here's what the Second Temple is. The first temple was built around 1000 BC, from about 1000 to about 950 BC. Some sources say it was inaugurated in 957 BCE, before the Common Era, right? So this is the first temple. It was commissioned by David. The materials and the money were raised by David, and then it was built by Solomon. So it's frequently referred to as Solomon's temple, but it's also called the first temple. So it was built roughly around between 1000 and 950 BCE, but then it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 587, 586 BCE. So it only stood for not even quite 400 years, and it was destroyed, okay, by the Babylonians, who invaded and destroyed the temple. So then you've got the Babylonian captivity, then you've got, which lasts for, 70 years, and then the Persians conquer the Babylonians, and Cyrus the Great releases the Hebrew captives and then allows them to go back and, here you go, rebuild the temple. So this is how we start to understand what is called the Second Temple. So the first temple, that's Solomon's temple. This is the Second Temple, okay? It was built under the leadership of Zerubbabel, along with Ezra, Nehemiah, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into all the details of that. It's not super important for this overview, but this is the Second Temple, right? So Cyrus the Great, the edict of Cyrus the Great to release the captives was 539, 538 BCE, right? Rebuilding began 4 to 5 years later, roughly 4 to 5 years later, 535 BCE. Then there was some interference by the Samaritans. The Samaritans got their fingers in this whole thing, and they sent delegations to the Achaemenid Empire and made all kinds of trouble. So the rebuilding of the temple got delayed. So it wasn't finished and inaugurated until basically 516, 515 BCE, roughly 20 years after they went back. Not only were they released, but from when the rebuilding began. Okay, then this is also very important here. This is also the temple that was remodeled by Herod starting roughly in 2019, 18 BCE, right in that area there, 2019, 18, right in there. But then this is also the temple that was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, Common Era, or AD, right? In 70. So the reason I bring this up is that because technically the Second Temple era is 515 BCE to 70 CE. So that's 585 years. Okay, so it's almost 600 years. Now, so Second Temple Judaism is, in broad strokes, 500 BC to, here you go, I'm going to say 100 AD. I'm going to give some extra time, because even though the Second Temple is no longer standing, it was destroyed in 70 Common Era, right, CE. You still had Jews living in Jerusalem, and then actually it takes until a little longer more like about 130, roughly 135 AD, AD, Anno Domini, or CE, Common Era, following the Bar Kokhba revolt, where the Romans flattened the city and renamed the city and renamed the entire region, etc. Because even though the temple was gone, the thinking wasn't completely gone yet. So the Second Temple era is about 600 years, from 500 BC to about roughly 100 AD, right? That's the Second Temple era. And it demonstrates a certain worldview. So that's why this is critical, is because the Bible predominantly comes from the Second Temple era. Even a lot of the Old Testament. Now, the Old Testament reaches back much further. Okay, don't get me wrong. The Old Testament reaches back much further and clearly uses sources that are much older than the Second Temple era. Okay, in the Old Testament clearly uses sources that reach back much further, but the Bible as we know it was mostly redacted and codified in the Second Temple era. Okay. So understanding the Second Temple era is really important. Okay. Now, to get into another point here that is extremely important, okay, with why we need to understand the Second Temple era, is we've been playing a lot of very interesting, I've been using a lot of illustrations, playing a little bit of these rhetorical games, right? Talking about Old and New Testament, and the fact that, see, the Second Temple era, it's a Jewish culture. It's not a Christian culture. See, so if we import Christian ideas, we got to be really, really careful, because, see, I want to understand the Bible. I want to understand the Second Temple era so that I can better understand Jesus, because I am a follower of Jesus, the Messiah of Israel. Like, there's an example, right? We've all become very comfortable calling him Jesus Christ. Now, that's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. But here, I'll challenge you. Start calling him Jesus the Messiah instead of Jesus Christ. Just call him Jesus the Messiah. See what that does to your thinking. Okay. Because, see, we started to use the word Christ almost like it's a name, when it's not. It's not a name. It's a title. Right. Now, it's the equivalent of the Hebrew Mashiach, Messiah, anointed one. Right. Call him Jesus the Messiah, or better yet, call him Yeshua HaMashiach. Learn that little bit of Hebrew, Yeshua, or Aramaic. Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. See what simply changing that does to your thinking instead of Jesus Christ. Right? That's not wrong. Jesus Christ is not wrong. We're talking about the same guy, but what's the frame of reference in your head if you call him Jesus Christ and you switch it to Yeshua HaMashiach, right? Are we importing alien ideas backwards to the text? Alien ideas backwards to the text. So we've been playing games. We've been having some fun illustrating the distinction between the New Testament and the Old Testament, even though they are both part of the Second Temple era. Now, here's another piece of the puzzle that's very interesting. The prophet Malachi is widely recognized to have performed his ministry roughly around 420 BCE, and that therefore his ministry is recorded in the book that bears his name, Malachi. Now, there's some debate about whether his name was really Malachi, because the word Malachi simply just means the messenger, right? So it may not have been a name. It may have been a title, right? But it's the last book, quote unquote, of the Old Testament. It's the last book to have been written. with the possible exception of the book of Daniel. And we'll talk about that some other time because it's the one exception. Okay, it's the one exception. It's the singular exception, if it's an exception, right? But the book of Malachi is widely believed to have been written 400-ish, 420 BCE. So now, then the New Testament, right, was written over about a 50-year period of time between about 50 CE and 100 CE, right? So for easy calculation, we'll call it 100 CE. So again, that's about 500 years worth of time. But that's 500 years when apparently nothing was written, at least nothing that made it into the Bible as we know it. Nothing that made it into the Bible as we know it. Nothing is in the Tanakh. Nothing is that was written in that frame of reference is not in the Tanakh or is not in the New Covenant. Or is there? Right? Now I'm running out of time, so I won't get the time to go into detail about this, but we're going to introduce it now, and then we'll talk about it more next session, which is that I've got them on my shelf. I should have grabbed a couple so I could hold it up in front of the camera and show you. I've got a couple of books about this period of time. Now, I have been calling it the Second Temple era, and for the most part, that's what you should call it, right? Call it the Second Temple era. It is the most accurate descriptive term we have. There is another term that is a rough equivalent that you can use, but there's also, it's maybe not the best label. And that label is, it's often called the intertestamental period, okay? Now, the reason it may or may not be the best label is because that presumes you know what the New Testament is and or that you find it relevant, right? The intertestamental period means the period between the two testaments. Well, remember my question from what does a practicing Jew call the New Testament? Well, he may not call it anything because he may not touch it, right? But if you're speaking with someone who is Jewish and you mention the Second Temple era, right? They're going to go, oh, I know what that is. Whereas if you say the intertestamental period, believe it or not, you might actually insult them. Okay. So just that's a good reason to not necessarily use the phrase intertestamental period. Also, in certain circles, this is known as the deuterocanonical period. So that's a big trip over word, deuterocanonical, big academic word that just, it means the same thing, right? It means it means another canon, right? So it's referring to books that are not in the canon, the deuterocanonical period. And next week, we'll talk more about that in detail, because when you start talking about the canon of the Old Testament and the canon of the New Testament, that's simply an academic word or a historical word that means what books are included. So the canon of the Old Testament is what books are included in the Old Testament. The canon of the New Testament is what books are included in the New Testament. And it's very interesting to note, depending upon if you are denominationally affiliated or not, and if you are denominationally affiliated, what denomination do you follow? Because that may change what's in your Bible. Okay. See, I am predominantly a Protestant. Okay. Now, I was raised a Roman Catholic. I'm not a Roman Catholic anymore. I am absolutely a Protestant. There's no question about that. But I happen to be aware of the fact that the Catholic Bible is different than the Protestant Bible. There are more books in the Roman Catholic Bible than there are in the Protestant Bible, because the Roman Catholics consider these additional books to be a part of the Old Testament canon. They say, yes, they're supposed to be there. Interesting. Very interesting that they believe there should be extra books there. But the point I'm trying to make, and I'm going to wrap up here because I'm running out of time is, like I said, I should have gotten a book, and I'll do it next time. I'll show you for the camera. There's a lot of books that call this the silent years, the 400 silent years. Well, here's the funny part. They're not. They're not remotely silent, not even close. As a matter of fact, there was a ton of writing going on. There was and therefore a lot of reading going on, right? A lot of writing and a lot of reading from Jewish scribes, Jewish writers, Jewish authors who were writing stuff. Now, it just never got included in the Bible, but it doesn't mean it's not out there, and it doesn't mean it's not relevant. Okay. Now, there's a long drawn out conversation about whether it belongs in the canon or not. Those are other conversations, but it doesn't mean that these other literary works are not relevant to the Second Temple era and are not relevant to our discussion and not relevant to our learning about the Second Temple era. So I'm out of time. I got to wrap it up there. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tim Keyes. I am the host of God Save the King. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, where we will see you again next week at 10 p.m. Friday Eastern Time. God Save the King.